together. It's just wonderful to be here to welcome Stephen Bush, who is our guest presenter today, with me, Rabbi Oliver. I just want to echo the sentiments from our last appeal. As somebody who grew up in Noam and in the movement and benefited hugely in relation to my own leadership and my own leadership skills and Judaism and growth through this beautiful and holy movement. Today is a day of learning and a day of investigation in our community. And it's also a day of fundraising that we must, during these times, support our community with all that we have. Resort to Judaism is an excellent organization, excellent platform through which to do that, to support Noam, to support all of our individual communities, and to support this rich Jewish life, which we're engaging in today as a community. Without further, you can do that through the Mazorti link that has been posted several times, will be posted again during this session, mazortijudaism.org. And welcome to all of you. Please feel free to type stuff in the chat as we go along, but otherwise we will begin today's session. I'm welcoming today Stephen Bush, and Stephen, in these crazy times we have not met in person, but we did have time to chat before this session began. Today's session is entitled Race, Diversity and the Jews. And Stephen, you are political editor at the New Statesman. You've in recent months been appointed chair of the Board of Deputies Commission on Racial Inclusivity. You're also a columnist with the iNewspaper and a political writer in residence at the University of Sussex. You write on a vast array of topics, which I won't attempt to list, but on Brexit, on Scottish independence, on lockdown, on human rights, on empire and post-colonial history, on economic policy in the UK, and far, far beyond those aspects. Today, primarily, you've been invited as a representative of the Board of Deputies and the Commission of Inquiry that you head, talking about race, diversity, and the Jews, and a question of what it means at this moment, in this time, to be a community that both learns about questions of race and diversity and also invests in some of the solutions. And you've been very clear today that you can't talk about the report that's about to be published, but we can talk about some of the more general issues around your work and your investigations up until now. I would just say that in having some time to prepare with you today, before today, that you come across as somebody really invested in this work. And aside from all of your other work, this work that you do for our community is incredibly important. And I thank you for your investment in being here today, and also your intended work as the report is released to spread news of your findings to the Jewish community and beyond. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. I will open with one question to begin with, which is just to tell us a little of your story so far and how you have come to be the chair of this Board of Deputies Commission on Racial Inclusivity, how you come to this work. You are very welcome today, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So I guess the story of how I come to this, to this particular bit of work is that the Board of Deputies very kindly asked me to do it, which was a very surreal experience. So I'm mixed race. I'm mixed race. So I was on this where my immediate thought when they asked me was, I'm not sure if I'm either black enough to do this or Jewish enough to do this, because I'm mixed race and I am I'm not observant. And I have to be honest, when they phoned, I thought, well, yeah, I'll say, well, I'm not observant, and they'll say, oh, well, in that case, we're not interested in that. That'll be that. But I guess for me, I have what I think is probably, at least feels like a fairly typical story for British Jews on the left. In the being mixed race, it was only when I got to university and left sort of a very diverse school in East London that I suddenly became very aware of being black, because in my part of the world, if your skin tone is like mine, you just don't stand out or think of yourself in that way. You think of yourself as being someone from, 2 or 3 or multiple cultures or ethnicities. And then, of course, as unfortunately has clearly become an even more sort of acute difficulty at universities since I was there, suddenly having to debate, and I understand it's not something which is important to other people, to debate the importance and centrality of Israel particularly in progressive spaces, those were kind of the moments when I suddenly started to be aware of my Jewishness as an ethnic identity, not just as a kind of family story, but something that's something that I felt passionately about in the present. And over the course, particularly of the last 5 years, when that's become a more live issue in left-wing spaces, it's something I've become more aware of as not just something that I kind of think about out of a sense of obligation to my to my grandparents, or not just something I think of as a sense of obligation to cousins, but something that is central and important to me. And so that's kind of how I first started to write about some of these issues from a Jewish perspective. Of course, after the murder of George Floyd, the Board of Deputies, having released a statement in solidarity, wanted to look inwards and not just outwards. And so they asked me to head up this commission. And that's kind of the story of how I've ended up doing it. It's been I found a very interesting and fascinating experience across a variety of issues that I have not lived myself directly. But yes, that's perhaps a convoluted story of how I got to be here and to be chairing this commission and overseeing this process.
Thank you, Stephen. My next question is just speaking, as you mentioned, speaking to those aspects of competing identity, and how do those aspects of your heritage, of your identity and identities talk to one another, and how does that affect your sense of self, both in this strange region of Britishness and this also slightly bizarre region of Jewishness, and how do you then identify and come through that?
Well, the really interesting thing for me, at least, is in terms of my kind of what I think of as the three strands of my four strands, I guess, of my identity. My sort of cultural inheritance of sub-Saharan Africanism and Jewishness, my sort of physical ethnic identity as someone who has darker skin, and my I always feel slightly embarrassing saying this in your own bedroom, particularly given the circumstance we've led to us all being confined in our own bedrooms. And also my sense of pride and patriotism in being a British citizen, and those kind of four strands of my identity. And the thing I always think is slightly different about them is that, for me at least, right, as I kind of said before, right, the question of even of whether or not I am Black or mixed race is only something that is slightly within my control. That's how I'm perceived visually, whereas my Britishness and my Jewishness exist when I turn out all the lights and I'm the only person in the room. They are things I think about and engage with at a kind of emotional level. I experience the world inevitably as someone who has darker skin, but there is no there's no, I don't carry around a Black equivalent of my pocket-sized JPS Bible that I draw some influence from and then I try and live a good life based around. I don't have a Black equivalent of a sense of both pride in some of our achievements as a country, our investment in science, obviously the thing which hopefully will lead to us all being able to be out as normal soon, and also a sense of shame at some of the things that we've done less well in the past and less well in the present. And so I think, for me at least, the way my identities kind of pull at each other is there's the thing which is the thing that is the first thing someone will notice about me, whether they do that in a racist way or just in a describing me if they had to meet me in a car park. There's the thing which is emotionally very important to me, which is my sense of Jewishness, and there's my sort of biggest shared identity, shared with 60 million other people, which is Britishness. And for me, at least, the way they go together is one of them, which is the foundation, which is, well, what is it I think informs having a good sense of ethics, having a good life? What is it which shapes the things I'm proud of about the United Kingdom? What are the things I feel that we could do better? And that obviously has Jewishness as its foundation. And then there's kind of the experiential stuff, which is how I experience the world as a Black person in a country that is where the vast majority of people aren't. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
No, your answers are very welcome. And I guess that the next question that I had relates also to this aspect that you're putting on the table, which is how people experience you and how you experience the world. And it is interesting to be, like you say, inside your bedroom or inside your house alone, where, as you describe, we're in the place where we experience the world in some way or another, exactly kind of to our own understanding, if you like. Um, I think the next question I have relates to then, as somebody born in the 90s, as somebody, you're about to have your 31st birthday, as I understand. Uh, I guess an important question, especially for a movement which is focusing on some of our younger leadership today during this fundraiser event, is why does the question of race and diversity in the Jewish community matter now, and matter specifically to somebody your age representing younger people, and also to this new generation of Jews and Jewish leadership?
I think it's a really good question. I think it matters for two reasons. The first is within our community, the mixed race, we are actually we're the fastest growing demographic in the United Kingdom as a whole, and within our community we are the second fastest growing part of our community. So in part it matters because, and of course we are concentrated largely among the young, among people who, they either their father or their mother will be from a different ethnicity, and how we welcome and retain our young people as we become a more diverse community is, I think, important to how we continue to be a growing and flourishing community. And one of the things I've drawn a huge amount of influence from with some of the recommendations in the report are the ways that Israel has successfully dealt with the challenge of being a multiracial Jewish democracy. And I've really enjoyed both some of the reading and some of the sort of evidence gathering sessions around that specific theme, and they've been an incredible use of wisdom to me. But the other, and this is one of the ways, and even if my report is a disaster, I think the thing that the Board of Deputies deserves real praise for its sort of prophetic leadership in setting this up, is this is the first time any minority community has set itself the task of going, how do we, not just how do we experience race and racial prejudice, how do we experience a lack of inclusivity ourselves, but how do we in our own spaces ensure that we are living up to that challenge? And I think it's pretty clear many other communities would benefit from this exercise. One of the things that is very heartening to me is the number of conversations I've had with other faith groups about how they might do something and how they might avoid some of my more terrible mistakes. And so I think this exercise is important, in terms of how we retain and welcome our own young people, but also as we go out into the world where we are a minority, not only in spaces dominated by the majority, but where we're the minority in spaces dominated by other minorities. I think there are lessons in this report, not least in the importance and value of having something like this report that will hopefully be of huge value, particularly to our young people as they go out into other spaces where we are ourselves the minority.
I guess there's a follow-up question there, which is that some of the conversations that I've had around Black Lives Matter and racism in this country in the last year have touched on questions of anti-Semitism. And I guess there's a kind of sub-question there about where the Jewish community should be focusing on anti-Semitism, where the Jewish community can effectively tackle racism at the same time and be part of a much larger party, a much larger club facing up against questions of racism and inclusivity in the country as a whole.
Well, I guess instinctively, I always think you're always better off where possible. And sometimes there are issues which are sufficiently endogenous that they have to kind of be taken on their own. But I think you're always better off where possible trying to build broad alliances. So if you take some of the work that we as a community are doing on online hate, where much of the research that the Centre for Countering Digital Hate does comes from communal organisations. Some of the most effective advocacy on the behalf of the government changing law to tackle some of this vile stuff comes from our communal organisations. But it's not like we're sitting there advocating going, oh, you've only got to take the anti-Semitism down. Yeah, the other bad stuff, it's fine, you can leave that up. We don't do that. That's not what we're doing. And I think then, for the most part, most of the mostly when we're doing sort of, cross-country stuff, that's sort of the answer to it. The specific difficulty is what do you do about the fact that anti-Semitism and racism is present in every society and every part of the United Kingdom, and that for other groups, you have pockets of anti-Semitism in there, and how do you deal with that challenge while also advocating for broad anti-racist norms? And I think actually Marie Van Ziel's done exactly the right thing with this, which is to engage with the causes of those protests while having a very clear and I think correct position on the problematic statements made by, one of the problems that movement has is it doesn't have leaders. And it's important, I think, to have leaders, and that's what gives a movement coherence, focus, and makes it more likely to be successful. But I think she's really modeled the correct way of dealing with some of those ambiguities and difficulties.
Thank you. Thank you. We're about to come, I guess, to the meat of the issue. We're about to come up to the release of your final report for the Board of Deputies. And we've discussed and been clear that you can't say what the findings of that report are. But there's an important question here, which I'd love to ask you to speak to, which is that in light of such impressive and large-scale protests in the Black Lives Matter movement in the last year, I'd like to ask you what you've learned about the Jewish community and diversity in our Jewish community in the last months that you are able to share with us.
Right, so
I'll interrupt you for a second and then also say, for those who would like to ask additional questions, please type them in the chat. And if we have time, we'll have time for a couple of bonus questions for Stephen towards the end. Thank you, Stephen.
So I think the most sort of interesting thing, and this is something I've talked about before, is that one of the kind of jokes we often tell against ourselves as a group, and I've told it against myself, and I'm trying to wean myself off it now from the process of having this report, isn't, oh, we're good at complaining. Because one of the things I have really discovered and has been very moving is the second that this inquiry was set up, I received testimony from many, many people, many of whom weren't sure if they were within our scope, some of whom very clearly weren't, but had never had an opportunity to air these concerns, and many and everyone, even people who visibly weren't within our scope, they visibly had a very real problem. And then this commission was clearly the first time that they had felt able to talk about what had happened to them. And one of the things that is definitely going to be in the report and I can talk about is I'm very keen to foster what I think of as a complaints culture. In one of the problems I think is we often, across all forms of life, we certainly have this at the magazine, right? We treat every complaint like it's sort of a kind of time for us to go around sort of beating our breasts and talking about how awful we are. But actually, if as an organization you never receive any complaints, probably something more profound has gone wrong. And one of the things I'm very keen that this report does is foster a culture where we are both better at seeking complaints, better at receiving them, and them not, then the existence of a complaint need not in of itself be a sign of crisis, but a sign of organizational health. And I think one of the things I've really learned in this process was just how much pent up desire to speak about some of these issues, including, as I say, from people who weren't in our scope, who, if I had the time over again, I would potentially have had a broader remit. Although if I had done that, then this report definitely wouldn't be close to being finished. So it's perhaps best in a way that I didn't. But I think that's the biggest thing I've learned.
Mm-hmm. And I think I can speak to that from personal experience of working for communities where opening up that box has really enabled some of the voices in our community to come and speak very clearly about their own experiences, and also about how, you know, like you said, it doesn't have to be a kind of heart-wrenching, chest-beating affair, but it can be the opportunity for community organizations to truly learn. And I appreciate that, that answer. We've had a question in from Angela Gluck, which is perhaps a technical question, but certainly an interesting one, which is about whether we should talk about anti-Semitism and racism, or should we see anti-Semitism as a subset of racism? And do those classifications help in terms of identifying and tackling both?
That's a really good question. It's odd because one of the conversations I would have a lot during the Corbyn era, when I would meet other people to discuss what we needed to do about it, you know, we would discuss kind of the latest outrage. And someone in the Jewish labor movement made the point, and one of the problems was that the average person on the street does not understand what anti-Semitism is. And he was just like, we should just say there is a problem with anti-Jewish racism in the Labour Party. So, because that is a term that people understand what it means. And I think I really go back and forth on this, because it is, I think, firstly, true to say that the very term itself is designed to provide a pseudo-scientific legitimacy to bigotry, prejudice, hatred, and violence against us, right? I mean, that is the history of the term, is creating this sort of kind of fake sheen of respectability to bigotry and hatred against us. And so I instinctively feel like most of the time just talking about it in terms of anti-Jewish racism is more helpful to the man on the street. In terms of its conspiratorial manifestations and its manifestations in, you know, when people talk about Israel-Palestine, it can be very useful, I think, for experts and academics to think of and talk about it in terms of a specific discrete phenomena. But I think often in terms of advocacy, increasingly when I'm in my day job, where I'm mostly talking to a majority non-Jewish audience about the problems created by anti-Jewish racism, I often think it is more helpful to specifically use that term because it is more commonly understood, and because, yeah, I am doubtful about it. But I very much go back and forth on this topic, and I think I have probably, not over the course of both the process of doing the commission, let alone over the course of 5 years, occupied almost every possible position about whether or not it is a particularly useful term to describe the hatred against us.
Thank you. We have lots of questions coming in, which I really appreciate, and we'll come to some more of them. I promised myself that we wouldn't solely invite you here to talk about race, diversity, and the Jews. One question from out the ballpark. It's important to, in these times of COVID, to really strengthen ourselves as community leaders, which you certainly are one of our community leaders. I wanted to ask you about hobbies and passions and things that have kept you going during this time and kind of aided your strength and resilience to stay motivated in a time of lockdown writing this report.
Well, I guess one of the things which has kept me motivated, but unfortunately is causing me to get wider and wider. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the chain called The Good Egg. Now, it's this brilliant small chain of Israeli-owned restaurants. We've got one essentially right near the end of our road. And in lockdown, it's pivoted from doing these very nice kind of tapasy style meals to doing the world's nicest, I mean, also incredibly expensive, but the world's nicest bagels. And it's the big problem in lockdown is the knowledge that they're always there. And I can just get them without judgment, and no one but me can know that I was there yesterday. And so that's been one source of consolation. The other thing is I myself really enjoy cooking. And I've actually got really good at Mexican food in cooking, partly in lockdown, partly because the market in Seven Sisters has faced all sorts of difficulties. Many people there have pivoted to selling goods online. I've pivoted to buying goods online. I've got very good at making chicken. I think it's pronounced mole, but don't quote me on that. But that's been my main source of consolation is in lockdown. And will mean, of course, that my main post-lockdown project is going to have to be losing some of that weight, particularly once we move out an era when the one bit which, well, I would say the one which hasn't gained volume, but actually, unfortunately, this top half is matched by widening at the lower half as well.
This is why we decided to do this on Zoom, because there is no, we only see from here upwards, so everything is fine. It's all good. We won't judge your consumption at Good Egg. Just nice to hear a few words of how you carry on doing what you're doing, because I think that is a significant challenge, particularly at this time, at this moment in lockdown for many people in our community. And we continue to thank you for your work. Pivoting slightly, you recently wrote an article for your magazine, for the New Statesman, about empire. And I wondered if we could just kind of zoom in a little bit about how your story relates to empire, and also and then also relates to race and diversity in the UK.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we're all in different ways the product of empires, but I was reviewing a very good book by Sathnam Sanghera, although I didn't really agree with the conclusion, and then a book I enjoyed less by Gahinde Andrews. But one of the things that really made me think about was the reason why I'm here is that in the 19th century, fleeing Tsarist pogroms, my great grandparents arrived in the East End, and in the 19th and actually I realised at a similar time, some of my other great grandparents were leaving the United Kingdom to go and make a new life for themselves in South Africa, where of course the instruments of apartheid then caused my grandmother to have to come to the United Kingdom because she had met and fallen with child with the son of a man who was Cape Malay. So the only way for her daughter to have a normal life with all of the rights, and she was able to exercise her rights as a Commonwealth citizen, which of course flowed from the British Empire, to come here, where she met my grandfather, at the time a medical student at the Royal Free. And so without those various empires, the activities of Dutch colonists in South Africa, the activities of British colonists in South Africa, the activities of the Russian Empire, none of my family would have been here to come together to eventually produce me, which I think always creates this weird sort of difficulty around empire. Is that on the one hand, of course, it means that if someone said you can press a button and all of these awful things wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't press it selfishly, because it would mean that I wouldn't exist. But I think one of the challenges that we're clearly grappling with as a society at the moment is, what does it mean to be, as pretty much all societies are, a society inevitably founded on much to be proud of, but also past atrocity. And I think one of the things which is slightly easier if you're mixed race is you're very aware of the ways in which you are a collaborator as well as a victim. And I think one of the things that is important as we work out as a country how we feel about our past, to what extent we think it's useful to talk about it, because I think remembrance can be helpful, but I think also sometimes a bit of discreet forgetting is also helpful. And we've seen actually in some ways in South Africa, after Truth and Reconciliation, for it to work, one of the things you have to do is then go, let's let bygones be bygones. So that's kind of, I guess, my sort of imperial story and how I'm trying to navigate it at the same time as all of this other stuff.
No, I guess as you recount kind of how your story intersects with empire and different empires, I also think of a rabbinic intersection with the question of power and empires and kings and queens across all the generations, which is that in every generation rabbis have tried to understand how to interact with the powers that be. And that's a really live Jewish question, which I think in many ways you are continuing that tradition to interface and intersect with those very questions about how we engage appropriately and politically. One of my colleagues, Daniela Shaw, who currently runs the LGBTQ Mazorti group, asked a question about how this commission fits within a wider approach to minoritized and marginalized groups such as gender, sexual orientation, class, and disability. That's a big question, perhaps a tiny bit certainly outside of the scope of your inquiry, but nevertheless an important question, because at least in part, some of the seeds have been sown for other and more marginalized groups coming forward, and also taking their place at the table, talk about how we can become more inclusive community in larger spaces. Stephen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, precisely for the reasons you lay out. And actually, one of the continual challenges to me putting together the report is no one thinks of themselves as a set of disintermediated, protected characteristics. Yes, I'm mixed race, but I'm also a journalist, and I might in some ways be as offended by someone in the community lauding someone who's called for, you know, journalists to be locked up or whatever, than I would be by them saying something that was an example of anti-Black racism. And we received a number of, you know, complaints and questions about advocacy the community does, speakers who various organizations have invited, where you have someone saying, well, look, I was upset about this because of remarks they'd made about LGBT people. And you go, well, fair enough. And it doesn't really make sense to kind of talk about difficult speakers only with one hat on, because that's no one experiences any of these issues with one hat on. So I think what I hope I've done, because obviously one does have to remain within one scope, is strike the right balance of going, well, look, there are broader issues here. There are some issues which do require further investigation, but I hope that even if people don't like the conclusions, and the model, and I've been very conscious throughout of the fact that we're the first community to do this. This is the first exercise, really, other than a very good report the Board of Deputies did on the role of women in leadership a couple of years back. This is the first organisation of the first exercise of its type. And I think inevitably some of the lessons have a direct read across, but some of the others are quite, will be quite different. But I hope and believe that this won't be the last commission of its type.
Very good. I also hope and believe that this won't be the last commission of its type. I'm going to do some of our summing up questions, because I want to make sure that we get to them before our time runs out. And then I will try and include final questions from our delightful and dedicated audience today before we finish up. And I'm really going to try my best to get to as many as possible. Importantly, I have two closing questions. Importantly, you're addressing our annual fundraiser. The link is still open. Please still give. We're £90,000 away from our target of 160,000. That's amazing. Please, Stephen will forgive you if you donate while he's still talking. You're addressing kind of a mishmash of Masorti communities from across the Masorti movement today. If there's one takeaway that you'd like us to take with us, one message on this question of race, diversity, and the Jews, what would it be today?
Gosh, that's a very big question. I think in some ways the biggest takeaway is just we're all Jewish, and we're all, and obviously that is, there's a wonderful bit at the beginning of Zion in Africa, which is a history of the Jews of Zambia, which includes, there is no definition of Jewishness and will satisfy everybody. But one of the things that has been both challenging but also quite fun about this process of evidence gathering is our witnesses don't agree on anything. I mean, literally nothing. There is no topic that the witnesses agree on. And I think one of the sort of important things that people want most of all is to be seen, and to be seen and to be represented. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, is that sense of being seen. I know it's a bit vague and woolly, and the report is less vague and woolly than that. But that's kind of, I think, the big thing is people's desire to be seen.
I mean, having run a couple of events in this year on Black Lives Matter, I think that that's a really important aspect of communal engagement. That in a very simple level, we do a lot just by putting on events like this, to be able to talk about the questions that are in front of us. And whilst it's only a first step, it's a very important one to showing different aspects of our community and talking about how we become a more inclusive community. The last question that I'm going to ask, and then however many minutes we have left, we'll carry on asking questions from our audience. The last question I'm going to ask is, how do we stay in touch with you? How do we stay in touch with your work? And I know you've said to me in our preparation for this that you are doing a lot of work in the next months to make sure the messages of this report gets out. But how can we kind of be with you in that journey?
Well, I think, you know, the sort of the things I was strongly urging on is, as I kind of keep saying, I'm not this, you know, this isn't a tablet of stone. It is a PDF. It's something I want people to contest, think about, discuss, talk about ways they think it goes too far, talk about ways they think that it doesn't go far enough. I really want it to be something that people feel able to argue about and argue with. I do have a commission email address, which is commissionchair@bod.org.uk, which I hope will continue as we do this process of checking up on the report's recommendations over the next couple of years. But do get in touch with me via that or via my New Statesman email, which is just my first name dot my surname at newstatesman.co.uk. I have been hugely indebted to the various things people have sent me to read over the last however many months, and I imagine I will continue to be similarly indebted.
Great. So I have one, I think we might have just time for one more question, which is another, you know, we invite you to come and talk about racism and diversity and the Jews, and then we throw lots of other questions at you, which are a little bit outside of just this remit, but hang on, I just have to find the question. I had it. The question was, oh my goodness. The question was about, thank you. Georgia Kaufman was asking about becoming an LPBAME officer. And she was speaking specifically about this question of anti-Jewish racism and anti-Semitism. And the question that she asked was does her whiteness and middle classness trump her ethnicity?
No, and I think so. This is very much me taking off my commission hat, because I very much take the view that it's very clear to me that there are lots of British Jews who understandably do not feel like they are BAME, and I'm not going to tell people they're wrong about how they self-identify. But I think at least it doesn't, for a couple of reasons. The first is that ultimately, as our own history, let alone, you know, the history of the Roma, or indeed in a British context, and particularly in a British imperial context, the Irish, shows, right, racism is not about your skin color. And I think one of the, you know, it is about that word that George used earlier, minoritized. It's about what happens when your identity becomes seen and treated in this weird racialized manner. And I think one of the really important things, and I think this is one of the reasons why we've historically been the minority who most excites and frightens the far right, is one of the things that we can show in a way no other minority can, is just how ridiculous this stuff is. Because we all look different, right? Yeah, I mean, you can't see it because of the angle I put it in, but there's a photo of my mother in which people have got her, kind of, some people have guessed she's Lebanese, some people have guessed she's Sephardi, some people have guessed that she's just from the East End, right? But crucially, the thing that we can show is that this stuff is a fiction, right? Race is largely a fictional concept. And we do experience racism. I think particularly in the Labour Party, it's very important that those of us on the left try and reclaim our right to be in that space after having felt driven out and alienated for it. So no, I think it's great, and you've run for that post, and I think I'm sure you'll be brilliant at it.
Stephen, I have less than 30 seconds left. I just really want to thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for supporting Masorti Judaism in our fundraiser and our event today. And you've put across great wisdom in all the work that you're doing and in the way that you've addressed all of our questions. And I'm very appreciative on behalf of our community. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with the fundraiser.